Welcome back to A Year of Final Fantasy, and today we're going to be talking about the follow-up to Final Fantasy XIII that obviously is Final Fantasy XIII-2. It's a very divisive game on the level of, I don't know, let's say Final Fantasy VIII, but it's been much more warmly received than its predecessor, the original Final Fantasy XIII. Final Fantasy XIII-2 was developed by Square Enix alongside Tri-Ace, who is another company that they regularly partner with, especially Enix. They've worked on series like Star Ocean, for example. Anyway, Final Fantasy XIII-2 was released a few years after the original game, on December 15th, 2011 for Japan, January 31st, 2012 for North America regions, and a few days after that on February 3rd for the EU. So development actually itself only lasted for about, I don't know, a year and a half or so. Final Fantasy XIII-2 does a lot of things very differently than the original, and it takes place in game time about 3 years after the first game. Due to the nature of the game and it being a sequel, there are going to be some light spoilers here, but I'm going to, go about it in such a way that it won't ruin the ending of Final Fantasy XIII if you haven't finished it yet. But just be aware that there are some things that I have to talk about because it is, the sequel. So Final Fantasy XIII-2 begins with an epic cinematic scene that is actually what I used for this month's Year of Final Fantasy background. Lightning features in a big way as far as the narrative goes, at least at the very beginning. However, despite that, the game itself largely is focused on Sarah, her sister, and another newcomer named Noel Chris in the aftermath of Final Fantasy XIII. However, it's not just a simply kind of linear continuation on the way that you would expect any kind of story to be, continued on with a sequel. Before I get into all that, let's go over some of the more familiar elements, for example, such as the combat system, which is very familiar to those who have played Final Fantasy XIII, and yet it actually offers some incredibly different aspects. As far as, party management is the big thing. Unlike a traditional Final Fantasy, here you only get 2 characters in your party that are proper characters, and that's going to be Sarah and Noel. But that being said, there are 3 spots for party members, and the 3rd slot is actually reserved for enemies that you can actually catch and train to battle with you. It's honestly not dissimilar from Pokemon type of thing. Everyone here has their own Crystarium, which is structured slightly different than normal, but is basically exactly what you would expect from the last game, just with simple, slight changes. So going along with the third-party member monster kind of thing, it does open for some DLC content, which some familiar faces we do see from other Final Fantasy games that comes in the form of monsters. Despite your feelings on DLC, it's actually a pretty cool way to get some of the old people back. For instance, I'm talking about Ultros, which is awesome. Yes, you can get Ultros in this game to battle alongside your character. He looks fantastic in full HD glory. The biggest issue that's fixed with this game is the focus of an incredibly non-linear story, which I'll actually briefly talk about here in a minute. But the other issue that's fixed is another large complaint that most people had about the original game, and that is the lack of proper towns, or kind of town structures anyway. Here in Final Fantasy, there are indeed towns as you would expect in a normal Final Fantasy RPG. Tons of people to talk to, you can buy items with, and just, they're towns. It's, it's not a foreign concept to anyone that's played an RPG. But anyway, let's talk about the actual structure of the game as far as narrative is concerned. And here, this by far is the reason that honestly, this is one of, if not my favorite game from the 360 PS3 generation. And for those that don't know, just a little bit about me, Chrono Cross and Chrono Trigger are my favorite RPGs, at least video game wise. Chrono Trigger's time traveling aspect and Chrono Cross's dimension hopping aspect are basically my favorite things ever. As silly as it sounds, it's actually a huge reason that I went into like astrophysics and I studied a lot of quantum mechanics and everything. I really enjoy that kind of narrative storytelling. And all that being said, Final Fantasy XIII-2 not only focuses on time travel, but actually the dimensional travel aspect as well. And in fact, the vast majority of the game is just time hopping and fixing paradoxes and branching, storylines and stuff like that. It's essentially combining Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross together while layering on the Fabula Nova Crystallis mythology. It's pretty great. Along with the story though, we do have a proper villain figure here in the form of Caius Ballad, who many people actually do regard as one of their favorite antagonists of the franchise. Unlike the previous game, which, yes, there were primary antagonists and stuff with, well, I don't want to spoil it, but here it's a little bit more cut and dry who you're going against and why you're going against them. So all that taken into account, I do love this game so much. The fans spoke out. They didn't like Final Fantasy XIII by and large for several different reasons. And here they really honestly did take that into account and made a game that people, would want to play, like a Final Fantasy XIII that they envisioned. And I really wish this game would have been the original Final Fantasy XIII and have 13 be like a, make that a sequel, prequel or whatever And it sucks that I don't really think a lot of people are going to get to play this game because of the sour taste that Final Fantasy XIII left in their mouth, which is a shame. You can actually play the game though if you don't want to play Final Fantasy XIII. It does give you a recap on the story's events, and honestly, I mean, that's all you really need. If you really want to go and get into it, you will get more out of this game, but honestly, you can just watch the recap and then go from there. And I guess I'll end the video here. All I can say is if you enjoyed Chrono Cross or Chrono Trigger, you really do owe it to yourself to play this game, even if you don't want to play 13. The storyline, obviously being as non-linear as it is, especially with dimension hopping, time traveling, all of that stuff, it can be confusing if you're not familiar with that kind of narrative. But, you know, for those people that love the lore, love the mythology, all the like strange paradoxes that you have to correct, then play this game. Absolutely. You won't regret it. And don't even think of it as a Final Fantasy game. Just think of it as a solid RPG. And in my opinion, it couldn't be a better follow-up to satiate the fans, like I said, of Final Fantasy XIII. You know, they tried to put in towns, they tried to make a much, much less non-linear storyline. And honestly, I believe that they succeeded in this game. No question in my mind that this is one of the best games of the PS3 360 era. So thank you as always for watching and sharing this and everything. We do have one more game to wind up this month. Obviously, that's Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII. It's very oddly named, as it is the third game in Final Fantasy XIII series, yet it's not named Final Fantasy XIII-3, but we'll get into that later. So as always, until next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.